When you were a kid, did you ever hear someone say, eat your fruits and vegetables? You probably didn't want to do it, but like most people, probably suspected that it was a smart strategy in order to be as healthy as possible. But if you've used that thing called the internet recently, you've probably seen exactly what I've seen, which is that there's doctors and experts and influencers that tell you that fruit is bad for you. It will make you gain weight, and it will raise your blood glucose or your blood sugar just as much as white table sugar. This is especially true among some weight loss and diabetes influencers who claim that whether you're trying to cut down on your weight or trying to improve your diabetes health, that you should only eat berries and or avoid fruit completely. And then you have some advocates from the plant-based world telling you the exact opposite information. They say lower your dietary fat content because that'll help reduce your LDL cholesterol and contribute to weight loss. They'll tell you to reduce your intake of meat and dairy products. And they'll tell you to eat more fruit of all colors, all shapes, and all sizes. So what gives? How can there be two completely different perspectives pointing fingers at one another, claiming that their research is better than the others? If you're confused, join millions of other people who are as well. Now, we went on the internet and we took a look at what people are actually saying so that we could get a better idea of what confusion actually exists. Now, you can see on the screen that people ask these questions like, is fruit actually bad for you? And they write comments like this. They say, is the sugar in fruit actually unhealthy and bad for you? I've seen this asked, so here's my latest response. Now, we all know that sugar is bad for us. In excessive amounts, sugar consumption leads to an increased risk of obesity and general metabolic damage that is even worse for our teeth. Clearly, the amount of sugar and refined carbohydrates is unnatural and should be minimized. With the rise of ketogenic diets and the popularity of low carb being symbolic of lean physiques and a healthy lifestyle, we must think about fruit. However, there have been some ridiculous claims about fruit itself being unhealthy for you. And in order to understand this, you have to understand the fallacy in thinking that just because a ketogenic diet can be a way to exclude fruit and improve your physique and improve many aspects of your health, that fruit is inherently bad for you. This is completely irrational and it doesn't stand the test of research. Other people are saying, are fruits really as unhealthy as normal? Somebody says, my dad is really into this whole carbs are bad for you thing and always tells me to stop eating fruit. So now he says that fruit is just as unhealthy as sugar and also easily replaceable because vegetables, except for potatoes, contain many vitamins. Is this true? Would that mean that most healthy people should avoid fruits as well? Another comment. People say chemically, the sugar in fruit and candy are exactly the same, but the effects on your health couldn't be more different. The natural sugars in fruit process differently in your body because the fiber in fruit minimizes the sugar's impact on your blood sugar. And in addition, you also get things like vitamins, minerals, and other healthy nutrients. You know, the more you read, the more you get confused because everybody seems to have an answer and it's based mainly on what they think is true. So the truth is that most of the information that you read on the internet just comes from people who are trying to make sense of the world. Most people don't have an advanced degree in biochemistry. They're not doctors and they haven't studied nutrition to any level of detail. And that's okay because people are just trying to make sense of the world around them. And some of this is actually just a classic case of misinformation, of partial understanding and of sketchy recommendations. And flat out, there's just quite a bit of sketchy science that circulates on the internet. So what is the answer here? Like your parents said, are fruit and vegetables a good way and a smart idea to optimize your health? Or is there actually legitimate scientific reasoning that the ketogenic, the carnivore, the paleo, and the Atkins advocates use that help us understand that that's the jury, the judge, and the executioner for all fruits, because fruits are nothing but sugar? Well, here's a spoiler, and I think you already know this. Fruits are fantastic. They're the foundation of a lifestyle that improve your health in the short term and in the long term. And there's a lot of hard science to back that up, which we'll go into detail here. Now, this is doubly true if you're trying to lose weight and infinitely if you're trying to reverse diabetes. Our entire platform is based on this concept, and I want to be very clear about exactly why it's the case. Now, most keto and carnivore dieters are people who want to eat a certain way, and they have interpreted the science using their own brain and have come to the conclusion that eating a low carb or very low carb diet is the best approach for both short-term and long-term health. Now, listen, people who eat a ketogenic diet, they're not bad people. They're actually amazing human beings. I have plenty of friends that eat that way. In the same way, people who eat a plant-based diet also have interpreted the science using their own brain and have come to the conclusion that eating a higher carbohydrate-rich food diet is the healthiest approach. They're not bad people also. They're amazing human beings too. So the real question here is, what should you do about fruit? Should you increase it? Should you decrease it? Or should you avoid it altogether? You can think of this episode as fruit's trial of the century, because we're going to be taking aim at 5 reasons why eating fruit is actually a great idea to improve your metabolic health and increase the likelihood of losing weight and keeping it off. We're going to explore the following. Trial number 1, fruit is just carbs and carbs are bad. Trial number 2, eating fruit is equivalent to eating table sugar. Trial number 3, fruit spikes your blood sugar and that's bad for you. Trial number 4, eating fruit is going to make you gain weight. And trial number 5, fruit is worse for you than meat. It's a common misconception that eating carbs are going to make you gain weight and harm your metabolic health no matter what. In reality, this is only true if the carbs or the carbohydrate energy that you consume comes from refined sources. In fact, high carbohydrate diets can be healthy and beneficial for you when they are sourced from nutrient-dense whole sources like fruits, starchy vegetables, legumes, and intact whole grains. We refer to these as our green light foods, and we wrote about them extensively in our book, Mastering Diabetes. Now, if you haven't picked up a copy of that book, then just go to Amazon and get one right now. It'll hopefully help you understand exactly why green light foods are the cornerstone of a nutrient-dense diet and how they can actually help you reverse many metabolic diseases, including prediabetes and type 2 diabetes. In order to understand the confusion between the low carb and high carb approach, you have to understand that there are 2 main types of carbohydrates, period, end of story. Type number 1, refined carbohydrates. Type number 2, whole carbohydrates. Let's deep dive. Refined carbohydrates are the type of carbohydrate that comes from refined sources like sucrose, high fructose corn syrup, and dextrose. These are all the results of a manufacturing process in which a whole fruit or a whole vegetable or a whole grain is subjected to a combination of steps involving cutting, milling, cracking, grinding, washing, extracting, boiling, steaming, condensing, and drying. The final product is a solid crystal, a powder or a flour or a syrup that is either sold as is or it's added to other products such as cereals and pastries and sodas and sauces and condiments and crackers and pastas and breads and dressings to make them appealing to customers. The end result of adding refined carbohydrates to packaged foods is a pleasurable eating experience, which in turn creates a subconscious addiction that lures you back to buy more of the exact product that you enjoyed. Refined sweeteners can be made in a laboratory from artificial ingredients, or they can be made from whole food sources. Examples of laboratory and refined sweeteners include things like aspartame, Equal, Splenda, and Sweet and Low. Examples of natural foods that have been turned into refined sweeteners include stevia and agave. Now, stevia is often refined into a powder or liquid sweetener, and agave is often refined into agave nectar. Now, refined sweeteners are made from artificial ingredients and from natural foods and are added to many packaged items in the grocery store. And some of them are specifically marketed as diabetic-friendly options because they are quote unquote sugar-free, because they contain few or 0 calories. And regardless of whether a refined sweetener is made from artificial ingredients or from natural sources, we encourage you to minimize or eliminate them altogether. Now, let's talk about whole grains. Intact whole grains keep their outside bran and their germ intact, whereas refined grains are stripped of both, leaving you with just the inside, what's known as endosperm. Now, food manufacturers remove the bran and the germ on the outside in intact whole grains in order to prolong their shelf life, because the longer the grain can sit on the shelf, the more likely it is to become profitable. Refined grains are just the starchy inside, containing significantly less fiber and fewer antioxidants and vitamins and minerals and protective phytochemicals than their intact whole grain counterpart. Now, these components not only aid in optimal nutrient absorption and transport, but they're actually essential for those processes. Now, refined grains and products made from flour are metabolized and absorbed into your blood very quickly. And that can result in a large rush of glucose into your blood in a very short period of time. If you've ever experienced high blood glucose within a few hours of eating a product like refined grains, then that's likely because the flour used to make the food that you eat was absorbed into your blood very quickly, and that overpowered the ability of your liver and your pancreas to control your blood glucose with precision. Simply switching to a true intact whole grain, not made from flour, can dramatically improve your blood glucose and can keep your blood glucose controlled in the few hours following a meal. Now, let's talk about other whole carbohydrates in general. Whole carbohydrate-rich foods are made up of long chain molecules and are mainly found in plant foods, like I said earlier, fruits, vegetables, beans, lentils, and peas, which are legumes, as well as whole grains like brown rice, buckwheat, millet, barley, and quinoa. The carbohydrate chains in whole foods come prepackaged with micronutrients, and this is one of the most important aspects of whole carbohydrates. They come prepackaged with vitamins and minerals and fiber and water and antioxidants and phytochemicals. These are vital behind the scenes players that play an incredibly important role in directing how nutrients are utilized in tissues all throughout your body. Now, carbohydrate-rich whole foods are some of the most nutrient-dense foods on the planet, period, end of story, providing you with lasting energy as well as high-quality micronutrients that refined carbohydrate foods simply don't contain. Micronutrients present in whole foods are potent and highly bioactive compounds that can reduce inflammation, they can boost immune function, they can help digested food material move through your digestive tract, they can help blood clot at the site of an injury, and they can improve the function of your brain, your sexual organs, your eyes, your heart, and that's only scratching the surface. In the same way that blueprints contain the information necessary to build a house, micronutrients provide the information that tissues require to digest, absorb, and transport and uptake and oxidize nutrients from the food that you eat. And carbohydrate-rich foods are the most micronutrient-dense foods on the planet. I will repeat that. Carbohydrate-rich foods are the most micronutrient-dense foods on the planet. If you believe that micronutrients are transformative for your overall health and you're in the process of trying to find more micronutrients in the food you eat, eating more carbohydrate-rich foods will get you there very quickly. Now, when we recommend a high-carb diet, we don't just mean any kind of carbohydrate. Specifically, we mean whole carbohydrates. And it's very important to make that distinction in your language when you're talking about it and when you're interpreting what other people are telling you. Okay? There is no substitute for this. There are two types of carbohydrate. There's the refined and the whole carbohydrates, and it's just that simple, period, end of story. Now, take a look at the study performed in 2002 by researchers at Harvard. They studied almost 1,200 men and found that those who ate the highest amount of whole grains had 42% less risk for developing diabetes. Their conclusion was simple. In men, a diet high in whole grains is associated with a reduced risk of type 2 diabetes that may be mediated by cereal fibers. That's the type of carbohydrate they chose to use in this study. Efforts should be made to replace refined grains with whole grain foods. Then there's another study that was performed in 2016. And in this study, researchers uncovered that those who ate fresh fruit 3 days per week were 13 to 28% less likely to experience what are called macrovascular complications, which are complications that occur in large blood vessels that can increase your risk for heart disease and stroke, as well as microvascular damage. That's damage that occurs in small blood vessels in your kidney, in your eyes, and in your nervous tissue. So those who ate fresh fruit 3 days per week were 13 to 28% less likely to experience both macrovascular and microvascular damage than people who decided to eat zero fruit. So if you take this information combined with what I said earlier, what's the verdict of this trial? Complex carbohydrates, including fruit, are great for your metabolic health. And our recommendation is to eat a lot of them. Simple carbohydrates like cookies, crackers, chips, sodas, and pastries, those are the types of carbohydrate to avoid like the plague. Now, this brings us to the second trial for fruit. Some people equate fruit to table sugar, and they claim that eating fruit is just as bad as eating candy. The reason behind this is actually similar to the reason for trial number one, which is due to the fact that a whole carbohydrate, like you'll find in fruits and vegetables, and a simple carbohydrate, like you'll find in table sugar, are ultimately converted primarily into glucose and fructose, and those two compounds are oxidized and stored inside of multiple tissues. Now, here's a simple way to think about this. Carbohydrates are nothing more than chains of monosaccharide molecules. Most people don't use the word monosaccharide because, well, it's cumbersome. And instead, they turn that word into sugar. So technically speaking, from a biological perspective, these monosaccharide building blocks are actually sugars. But the word sugar itself has a completely different connotation in our modern world. The term sugar refers to a refined sweetener that you buy at the grocery store that increases your risk for many chronic diseases. Table sugar, otherwise known as sucrose, is a classic example of a refined sugar. Table sugar is the end product of a manufacturing process that began with a whole food like sugarcane and sugar beets and is a crystalline substance that contains only glucose and fructose with nothing else. Okay? Now, the manufacturing process stripped the original whole food of protective micronutrients, including vitamins, minerals, fiber, water, antioxidants, and phytochemicals, rendering the final table sugar product literally nutritionally useless. The sugar that you think of as quote unquote table sugar, along with the sugar that your mom told you to cut back on, are simple carbohydrates. They're easily absorbable. They're short chain molecules. You can think of these as added sugars or refined sugars. I highly recommend, rather than using the word sugar, you always put a modifier in front of it. So here in this example, we're going to talk about them as refined sugars. And when you do that simple vocabulary change, it makes a huge difference in the way that you think about it. Now, carbohydrates found in whole food are different because they exist in a three-dimensional matrix of a collection of other nutrients that are extremely complex packets of information that your digestive system has the ability to interpret, to unpackage, and to distribute to other tissues in your body. Now, all whole foods have a similar three-dimensional construction, but they differ in the types and the amount of carbohydrate, of fat, and protein, and vitamins, minerals, fiber, water, antioxidants, and phytochemicals inside. The macronutrients and the micronutrients coexist in the same three-dimensional matrix. Their shape and their configuration is slightly different between a banana and a potato, between a chickpea and an orange. Okay. Now, fiber is the rebar that you find in concrete structures. It reinforces the structure of a whole food, and it gives it a shape and a consistency. And the rest of the nutrients, both the macro and the micronutrients, are interspersed throughout that three-dimensional space. Macronutrients are what account for the calories that you consume in each food, and that contains carbohydrate, fat, protein, and truly alcohol. And micronutrients offer disease protection, and they add nutrient density, which is good for all tissues. Now, here's where it gets fun. People talk about fruits as simple carbs, but in reality, fruits are complex carbohydrates or whole carbohydrates. Meanwhile, the bad sugars that you're thinking of, though, the simple carbohydrates, these contain things like table sugar and added sugars that you find in candies and sweets and high fructose corn syrup and sugar sweetened beverages and beyond. Okay, so what's the verdict? Okay. The verdict of trial number 2 is that eating fruit is just about the opposite of eating table sugar. Rather than equating both of them to saying, well, they both render this stuff called glucose and they both render this stuff called fructose, think of fruit as being a thing that exists in a three-dimensional complex matrix with both macro and micronutrients that offer disease protection versus refined carbohydrates, which are very short chain molecules, which are absorbed very quickly and offer no disease protection in any way, shape, or form. We recommend eating between 10 to 20 servings of fruit per day. Yes, I will say that again. We recommend eating between 10 and 20 servings of fruit per day. That may sound like a ridiculous amount, but we find that the people who do that end up reversing complex metabolic diseases, and they're able to lose weight and keep that weight off very effectively over the course of time. Okay. So if you ever see information that says fruit is the equivalent of table sugar, simply disregard it. It's just plain wrong. It's misinformation, and it doesn't belong in your head. Now, with that out of the way, let's address a fear that lots of people with diabetes have, which is that fruit spikes your blood sugar. And much like the first 2 trials, this misconception is based in taking a short-sighted view of incomplete data and then making it broad-based and making assumptions about that information. Now, fruit is high in complex carbohydrates, which in turn are converted into glucose like we just talked about. So naturally, your blood glucose will rise a bit when you eat fruit because you've just consumed more long chains that do break down into glucose. This is just plain science. But this is where people get really scared, because if you're living with diabetes or pre-diabetes, and then you eat a piece of fruit, the rise in your blood glucose from that fruit is going to be higher than it would be if you didn't have diabetes. Now, this is due to either, number one, a deficiency of insulin, as you will find in the case of individuals with type 1 diabetes like myself, or more commonly due to insulin resistance in the case of prediabetes, type 2 diabetes, and gestational diabetes. Now, insulin resistance results from the accumulation not of sugar, but of excess dietary fat in cells that are not meant to store large quantities of fat, and that inhibits the action of insulin. So when cells become more insulin resistant, then glucose builds up outside of the cellular membrane and in your blood. And that causes your blood glucose to rise because cells are effectively overloaded with too much dietary fat that came in before the carbohydrate energy appeared. As a result, the beta cells in your pancreas are then stressed to secrete more insulin in order to help force glucose out of your blood and into tissues. The immediate results are high blood glucose and an increase in insulin production, known as hyperglycemia and hyperinsulinemia simultaneously. So what does that mean for fruit and its supposed blood glucose spikes? Well, a lot of people with diabetes look at their problem and go, oh, well, more glucose leads to more glucose spikes. More fruit leads to more glucose spikes. But that's like saying that the answer to bleeding from a paper cut is just to have less blood. What I mean is this: you're missing the point if you focus on the high blood glucose and you don't pay attention to the cause. Your blood glucose may rise due to carbohydrate in your food. That is totally normal. But if you're already insulin resistant due to the accumulation of excess dietary fat that accumulated beforehand, then your blood glucose is going to go higher than you want it to go. So it's not technically the fruit that you should cut out. It's the fatty foods that cause the accumulation of excess fat, leading to what's known as intramyocellular lipid accumulation, as well as intrahepatic triglyceride. That's fancy scientific words for fat that accumulates in your muscle and fat that accumulates inside of your liver. Now take a look at this picture on the screen to show you the biochemical pathway of insulin resistance. And you can see here that the lipid droplet over on the left-hand side, as it grows in size, it can signal to the insulin receptor and impair the function of what is known as IRS1, which is a protein that docks to the intracellular side of the insulin receptor. When that happens, insulin signaling becomes dysfunctional. And that right there prevents GLUT2 and GLUT4 vesicles that are normally supposed to travel to the surface to import glucose. It prevents them from doing their job. So as a result of that, the insulin receptors become less functional. Glucose ends up pooling outside of the cell surface. That causes high blood glucose and an inability of glucose to enter cells. Now, once fat is at a physiologically normal level, you can eat fruits and other carbohydrate-rich foods to your heart's content without your blood glucose rising about 130 after a meal. So what's the verdict on this trial? Well, here's the deal. If you're insulin resistant, then fruit can certainly cause your blood glucose to spike, and fruit will cause your blood glucose to spike. But removing the fruit isn't going to help you out, because if you just simply remove the fruit and eat more meat and dairy and fat-rich foods, then that's going to make you more insulin resistant. It's going to fuel the problem. Instead, we want you to focus on being aware that your blood glucose is merely a symptom of insulin resistance. And if you can reverse insulin resistance using a low-fat diet, then you can end up increasing your carbohydrate tolerance over the course of time, which increases the amount of fruit that you can consume. That, my friends, is exactly how you increase your intake of fruit when living with insulin resistance. Hey, I'm Cyrus Khambatta, co-creator of the Mastering Diabetes Method, which has helped thousands of people reverse insulin resistance and take control of their lives no matter what type of diabetes they're living with. Do you want to know all of our tips, tricks, and secrets? They're right here in our New York Times best-selling book, Mastering Diabetes, which you can find at masteringdiabetes.org/book. If you're ready to master diabetes, pick up a copy today. You won't be disappointed. Now, let's get into one of the silliest items on the docket for today, which is the idea that eating fruit is actually going to make you gain weight. Now, first, let's be real. The truth is that every food could make you gain weight. The question is whether the amount of food that you're putting into your body initiates what's known as a positive calorie balance or not. So what does this term energy balance mean? A simple way to think about it is that energy balance represents the difference between, or the trade-off between, the amount of energy that comes into your mouth versus the amount of energy that you expend. The amount of energy that you expend is broken into three categories. Number one is your basal metabolic rate, which determines how much energy does it cost to actually run your quote unquote basal metabolism if you were lying flat on your back for 24 hours. Number two is referred to as the thermic effect of food, or TEF. And that refers to the amount of energy that it takes to actually digest the food that you consume. And the third is known as exercise. Exercise refers to the amount of calories that it takes to actually move your body during an exercise session, or move your body in order to on a daily basis. So if you sum together your basal metabolic rate plus the thermic effect of food plus your exercise, you get your total energy expenditure, which is the total number of calories that it costs for you to run your biological machine. If you are in a positive energy balance, what that refers to is that the amount of energy that comes into your mouth from the food that you are consuming is greater than the amount of energy that you are expending. If you are in a negative energy balance, what that means is that the amount of food that comes into your mouth is less than the amount of energy that it takes to operate your biological machine. And if you are energy neutral, or in a neutral energy balance, what that means is that the amount of calories that come in through your diet is exactly equal to the number of calories that you expend in your total energy expenditure. The reason I bring this up is because it doesn't matter what foods you eat, whether they come from the dairy world, the meat world, the refined carbohydrate world, or the fruit world. If you consume too many calories and you put yourself into a positive calorie balance, that means that the amount of energy that's coming into your mouth is greater than the amount of energy that you're expending, and the chances of you gaining weight go up. But in order to really dial down this conversation, we have to get into another concept, which we've talked about at length on this channel, and we'll talk about it again. It's called calorie density. Now, a quick summary here. Calorie density is a representation of how many calories are present in 1 pound of food. So butter lettuce, as an example, has a calorie density of 60 calories per pound, whereas olive oil has a calorie density of 4,000 calories per pound. So that represents the lowest calorie dense food that we know of and the highest calorie dense food that we know of. And all along the inside of the spectrum, you have a range of fruits and vegetables and nuts and seeds and processed and unprocessed foods, along with red meat, white meat, chicken, fish, oils, and beyond. So another way to think about this is that calorie density is the concentration of calories in a food. Now, bagels, as an example, are more concentrated in their calories than are tomatoes, because with every bite that you take from a bagel, you are going to be gaining more calories than it would be if you took the same bite out of a tomato. So typically speaking, foods that are low in calorie density tend to have a high water and a high fiber content. These types of foods provide a very satisfying feeling of fullness without adding a significant number of calories that can contribute to weight gain in the long term. Now, some examples of these low calorie dense foods include things like vegetables and fruits and whole grains and cooked beans and legumes, or things like oatmeal, non-fat dairy products, believe it or not, and soy products, as well as very lean animal foods. So those foods are considered on the lower end of the calorie density spectrum. Foods that have a higher calorie density are often characterized by their dryness or their fatty nature. Despite occupying minimal space on your plate and minimal space inside of your stomach, these foods come with a high number of calories per bite and a high number of calories per pound, which then means with every bite, you increase the total number of calories that you're taking in more than you may think. So examples of these high calorie density foods include things like butter, oil, salad dressings, sugar, nuts, seeds, dry bread, dry cereal, crackers, egg yolk, avocado, dried fruit, red meat, and even items that are convenience items like Egg McMuffins and pizza. So we recommend that in order to lose weight, that you keep your average calorie density to under about 700 calories per pound. And if you look at fruit, basically every single one settles somewhere between 135 and 420 calories per pound, which is exactly where we would like to keep it. So that range of calorie density between about 135 and 420 is below any meat product that you can find, as well as beneath the vast majority of common yellow light foods like processed breads. So you can take a look on the screen and you see that the green light foods on the left-hand side are mainly foods that come from the plant-based world, including things like butter, lettuce, again, the lowest calorie density food on the scale, along with black beans, brown rice, sweet potatoes, bananas, and broccoli. These are just a few examples of foods that fall into the green light category that tend to be low in their calorie density. The yellow light category has other foods like brown rice pasta, gluten-free bread, dried fruits, almonds, dates. These tend to be a little bit higher in their calorie density and tend to be in the yellow light category because a little bit of these foods can go a long way. And finally, the red light category usually is the foods that have the highest fat content as well as the highest calorie density. And these includes shellfish like shrimp, as well as red meat like steak, white meat like chicken, fish like salmon, as well as processed foods like Oreos, and then the worst of all, oils with a calorie density greater than 4,000. So if you just ate approximately 5 to 7 pounds of food per day, which is actually what research from Dr. Barbara Rolls' laboratory has shown conclusively, most people eat somewhere between 5 and 7 pounds of food per day. So if you know that you're going to be eating that on a daily basis, and you just tend to eat more fruits in substitution for other foods like meats and avocados and processed grains, you will by definition be eating less calories because you're moving slightly to the left on the calorie density scale, which means that for every bite and every ounce of food that you're consuming, you're taking on less calories. As a result of that, that's going to help induce a negative calorie balance. And the negative calorie balance is, again, where weight loss happens. And just to review, a negative calorie balance means that the amount of calories that are coming in your mouth are less than the amount of calories that you are expending. And weight loss is only possible in a negative calorie balance state. Don't you love it when biochemistry is pretty straightforward? It truly can be. Okay. Another factor that helps in determining the calorie density of food is called bulk. So bulk is a term given to the combination of water and fiber. And that occupies space in your digestive system, and it mechanically stretches your stomach and your small intestine and your large intestine. Now, bulk is actually one of the most important nutrients in your food because when bulk distends your stomach and your small intestine, your large intestine, there's a phone call and neurological signal that is initiated in your digestive system, which goes directly up to your brain, and it communicates with your brain to either slow or completely shut off your hunger signal. So you can think of it as that foods that are rich in fiber distend your digestive system. And as a result of that, the phone call that goes from your digestive system up to your brain into a region known as your hypothalamus is what enables your brain to recognize that there's something inside of your small intestine and inside of your stomach and large intestine. And as a result of that, it then responds by saying, you know what? I'm not going to eat very much food anymore because there's stuff inside of me already. Now, we recently covered a trend that millions of people are now following using the pharmaceutical medication known as Ozempic. And people are using this to lose weight rapidly. And in that video, we talked about the mechanism by which Ozempic can promote up to a 16% reduction in body weight over the course of about a year. And why non-diabetic people are actually finding ways to get bootlegged Ozempic so that they can lose weight easily and they can lose weight quickly. Now, Ozempic has the same mechanism of action as bulk in that it initiates a phone call with your hypothalamus from your digestive system that tells your brain that you're full. But it does so by tricking your digestive system into thinking that it's actually full when it's not. So Ozempic is what's known as a GLP-1 receptor agonist, which means that it talks to GLP-1 receptors inside of your digestive system. And by doing so, it tricks those stretch receptors that are in the walls of your digestive system into believing that they're actually being stretched, when in reality, they're not. And that initiates a neurological signal up to your hypothalamus, which is your appestat or your appetite center, to say, hey, could you slow down? There's stuff inside of me, which then leads to a reduced appetite and a dramatically improved or increased ability to lose weight. So if you want to watch that video about Ozempic, which I highly recommend, it might help change the way that you think about using medications to lose weight versus using food. Okay, just click either here or here or here to watch that video. and really understand exactly what Ozempic is doing, because the mechanism by which it works is very similar to the mechanism by which bulk works. And it gives you an opportunity to make a choice to say, okay, I'm either going to go down this route or I'm going to go down this route as my primary weight loss strategy. Now, because scientists believe that bulk is the most effective satiety signal that exists, the amount of bulk in your food is the most important determinant of how satisfied you're going to feel after you consume a meal. So the question that you get to ask yourself is this: if you're trying to lose weight, would you rather do it by eating foods that are rich in fiber, which will naturally talk to your hypothalamus? Or would you rather do it by injecting an expensive medication that tricks your digestive system into thinking that it is full so that it can initiate a call up to your hypothalamus to tell you that you're full? Okay. Guess what? Fruits are full of bulk, which means that they're going to keep you full, and they're going to distend your small intestine, and they're going to distend your stomach, and they're going to distend your large intestine, and they're going to call your brain and talk to your hypothalamus, and that's going to reduce your appetite, and that's going to induce negative calorie balance. So this is part of the main reason why when people tell you that eating fruit is going to help you gain weight, it's actually not a true statement, because fruit and many of its other plant-based counterparts are so rich in bulk, aka fiber and water, that the presence of the fiber and water is actually one of the most powerful satiety signals that has ever been discovered by scientists. So why are people trying to blame fruits for weight gain? One of the reasons might be that there's a fad that's circulating in the world today called the ketogenic diet. And I know that you've heard about the ketogenic diet because we've talked about it and it's all over the internet. And the ketogenic diet promises to deliver immediate weight loss by cutting your carbohydrate intake to less than 30 grams of net carbs per day. And while this initial batch of weight loss does come usually somewhere on the order of 2 to 3 pounds per week for the first 6 to 8 weeks, it also brings with it an increased level of insulin resistance, which has been shown to increase your overall chronic disease risk. So for the keto community, the fact that fruits are going to quickly make your diet, un-keto and get you out of the state of ketosis, people then think to themselves, okay, well, I'm not going to eat any fruit because if I do, then my keto diet is not going to work for me as well. Therefore, if I eat fruit, it's going to pop me out of ketosis. If I get out of ketosis, that's going to cause me to stop losing weight and or gain weight. And since I know that fruits are the equivalent of table sugar, well, then that's bad for my pancreas because it's going to cause my pancreas to increase the amount of insulin it secretes, which is going to cause an insulin spike. And that is going to then cause weight gain. So as you can probably put together at this point, that argument that I just presented is wrong in many ways. I know it sounds like a reasonable explanation for why eating a ketogenic diet is the right choice. But the problem is that so many of these arguments are not grounded in actual scientific literature that it becomes a story that sounds good, but in reality, it's not the right biological explanation and it's not biologically accurate. Now, remember, it's not the fault of fruit that's causing problems when you have insulin resistance. It's the total amount of fat in your diet that caused insulin resistance to begin with, especially saturated fat. If you're insulin resistant, you've created an environment where eating fruit will increase your blood glucose and stimulate excess insulin production. So rather than eating less fruit, the goal is actually to become less insulin resistant. And that in turn is going to increase your carbohydrate tolerance and enable you to eat more fruit. So what's the final verdict in this case? Because I know this thing can get very confusing, okay? The final verdict is this: fruit does not cause weight gain unless you're eating too many calories and you're operating in a state of positive energy balance for either weeks or months at a time. And secondly, if you gain weight from eating fruit, you're likely living with insulin resistance, and that you're going to benefit from reversing the insulin resistance phenotype. It's not because fruit is some sneaky heavyweight boogeyman that's wrecking your hopes and dreams of being at your ideal body weight. It's because in your basal metabolic state, you're living with an advanced level of insulin resistance, and that is causing a metabolic traffic jam, which then makes it very easy to go into positive energy balance, which then creates an easy possibility of gaining weight. And for our final trial, we tackle one of the most lopsided cases of the day. And this is the idea that fruit is actually worse for you than eating meat. Now, this idea comes from a combination of all the other trials wrapped together in a beautiful salad of just pure misinformation. Okay, you've got people thinking that carbs are bad for you, that they're equal to table sugar, and that they're bad because they spike your blood glucose and they spike your insulin and they're going to make you gain weight. So the answer people come up with is to eat more meat, not to eat more fruit, because fruit causes all these issues. And well, if you've been listening, you can see that this is actually not the smartest idea, because even though it may seem innocuous, if people are a little overweight or they get to a diabetes diagnosis and they hear that they shouldn't eat sugar or carbs, that's the sort of general philosophy that's communicated online as well as through the allopathic world. So you cut out all fruits and vegetables and then boom, before you know it, you're losing weight, and you're losing weight quickly. And you know that's a good thing because it's going to help you reduce your level of insulin resistance. It's going to help you reverse this thing called diabetes, which you just got diagnosed with. But then in that moment, you try and eat a bite of fruit, thinking that you've done everything right. And all of a sudden, your high degree of insulin resistance sends your blood glucose very high, and it stops you from losing weight. And because people don't really fully understand exactly what carbs are, and they don't quite understand insulin resistance, they think, oh man, thank God I've been eating all this meat, and I should avoid fruits even more and stick to good, healthy, grass-fed meat because that's the way to lose weight. But the problem is that when you do that, yes, you're going to lose weight. There's no question about it. But you're going to drastically increase your risk for chronic diseases that are caused by insulin resistance. And it turns out that most of all the chronic diseases in our world today are actually influenced by your degree of insulin resistance. Now, a meta-analysis published in 2013 provides a very comprehensive summary of both large-scale studies on the risk of developing type 2 diabetes from various types of meats. And the results are summarized in the table that you see on the screen right here. If you choose to eat 100 grams of poultry from chicken, duck, goose, or turkey, that can increase the relative risk of diabetes by between 4 and 8%. That doesn't seem like a very large risk, so you might be willing to take it. If you eat 100 grams of all red meat, including things like beef, pork, veal, horse, lamb, sausage, salami, bacon, and ham, then that can increase your risk for the development of type 2 diabetes by between 13 and 17%. So now that becomes a sizable increase in relative risk. The same thing happens if you eat 100 grams of unprocessed red meat. That can increase your risk for the development of type 2 diabetes by between 15 and 19%. 50 grams of processed meat, so half as much processed meat, like sausage, salami, bacon, and ham, can increase your risk for the development of type 2 diabetes by between 13 and 57%. Think about that number. 13% seems like a small number. 57% is not a small number by any stretch of the imagination. Okay. And that again comes from half as much meat as we did with unprocessed red meat and poultry. And finally, all meat put together, if you consume 100 grams of what is considered total meat, then that can increase your risk for the development of type 2 diabetes by between 12 and 21%. So again, this is definitely worth paying attention to. Okay. Now, the puzzle piece that connects each of these studies that were included in this meta-analysis is very simple. That there is a consistent and strong positive association between all meat consumption and type 2 diabetes risk, regardless of the type of meat or the degree of processing. And most importantly, every one of these studies found that a positive association between meat consumption and diabetes risk was present. And that can remove significant doubt about whether the detrimental effects of eating any type of meat, whether red or white or processed or unprocessed, actually exists. Okay. There's another very important consideration to take into account here, which we haven't talked about, which is that processed meats, including salami, bacon, sausages, and hot dogs, to name a few, were given what's called a Group 1 classification by the World Health Organization, which means that there is sufficient scientific evidence that these foods do, in fact, cause cancer. These are not foods that are just maybe associated with the development of cancer and maybe potentially causational. We have plenty of scientific evidence to demonstrate that these foods are carcinogenic without a shadow of a doubt. And then the red meats, including veal, pork, beef, lamb, horse, and goat, were given a 2A classification, which means that they probably cause cancer, but it needs to be a larger body of scientific evidence to actually fully demonstrate that. So in some huge studies like the EPIC study, there's absolutely no contest. The EPIC study is one of the largest investigations ever performed to investigate the connection between nutrition and chronic disease. And that involved hundreds of researchers, more than 500,000 participants, and 12 years of data. And what researchers discovered was very straightforward, which is that meat, especially processed meats like bacon and cold cuts and sausage and hot dogs and hamburgers, increases your risk for type 2 diabetes, while eating a diet rich in fruits and vegetables reduces your diabetes risk. The EPIC study also revealed that replacing 5% of saturated fat with fructose, whether it's fructose from fruits or, yes, refined sources of fructose, reduces your diabetes risk by 30%. And that replacing 5% of protein with fructose reduces your diabetes risk by 28%. So what does that mean? It means that whether you're consuming whole fruits or whether you're getting fructose from refined sources, that's a better alternative than eating meat and actually reduces your diabetes risk, even though the common vernacular is that fructose is bad for you and fruit is equal to sugar. Okay, it doesn't add up. Even though mainstream recommendations suggest that eating glucose and fructose from fruits is going to increase your risk for type 2 diabetes, after studying more than 500,000 people, EPIC researchers concluded that these monosaccharides, glucose and fructose, actually decrease your risk for type 2 diabetes, especially when they're eaten as substitutes for saturated fat and protein-rich foods. And then you can look at the Adventist health studies, the health professionals follow-up studies, the nurses' health study, the women's health study, and guess what? They all say the same thing. So is fruit worse for you than meat? Well, fruits, vegetables, and whole carbohydrates are tied to positive long-term health outcomes, as we have talked about ad nauseum on this channel and in this video. Meat of all kinds, especially red meats and processed red meats, are tied to negative long-term health outcomes, both for the development of cancer as well as for type 2 diabetes. So what's the final verdict? Well, if you include thinking about calorie density or insulin resistance, then fruit is actually significantly better for you than meat because it's lower on the calorie density scale. It's been proven to reverse insulin resistance and can help you lose weight into the future. And even if you don't take any of that into consideration and you're trying to put yourself into ketosis simply because somebody told you that you're going to get results without having to work out more, then the research suggests that you're likely to increase your chronic disease risk despite the fact that you're going to be able to lose weight rapidly. You can be the judge. To me, the answer is quite clear. Fruit is a better friend to you than meat is, both in the short term and in the long term, and there's no question about that. I know this to be true for myself. I know this to be true for more than 10,000 people that we've helped reverse insulin resistance. And there is no question in my mind that this body of research is extremely robust. I know this without a shadow of a doubt, and I hope that you are also coming to a similar conclusion. So after all this information, let's take a quick review. First, is fruit a carbohydrate? Yes. But it's a whole carbohydrate, not a refined carbohydrate. And there's a fundamental difference in the way that whole and refined carbohydrates are processed and distributed to tissues all throughout your body. Second, does fruit equal table sugar? No. Whole carbohydrates are protected by 8 classes of nutrients, including vitamins, mineral, fiber, water, antioxidants, phytochemicals, as well as protein and fat. But refined carbohydrates are unprotected by these same 8 classes of nutrients because refined carbohydrates have been stripped of many of these behind the scenes players and have a reduced nutrient density with less vitamins, minerals, fiber, water, antioxidants, phytochemicals, protein, and fat. Therefore, eating protected carbohydrates is the key to exceptional health, and that's exactly what the research demonstrates. Third, is fruit going to affect your blood sugar or your blood glucose? The answer is yes. Your blood glucose will rise to a physiologically normal level if you are insulin sensitive, and increase to what's known as a supraphysiological level, which is a high blood glucose, if you're living in an insulin resistant state. So the trick is not to avoid fruit. The trick is to become less insulin resistant before you begin eating the fruit. Finally, fourth, will fruit make you gain weight? The answer is no. It'll help you lose weight due to its large content of bulk, which again is fiber and water. And is fruit worse for you than meat? The answer is no. Fruits, vegetables, and whole carbohydrates are tied to positive long-term health outcomes. Meats of all kinds, especially red meat and processed meat, are tied to negative long-term health outcomes. So no matter how you slice it, eating fruit is actually beneficial for you. It can help reduce your chronic disease risk. It can help you reverse insulin resistance, which can then reverse the pre-diabetes and type 2 diabetes diagnoses. It can help you lose weight, and it's something that we recommend should be a central component of your diet. If you have any questions and you want more information, please feel free to leave a comment on whatever platform you're listening to this, or reach out to our team. Find us on social media. We're here to help in whatever way we can. Thank you so much. Have a great day.